The Democrats are going to retake the House officially. I believe tomorrow. I believe it's tomorrow. Tomorrow or Friday, I'm not sure. And Nancy Pelosi is already deciding to govern more Republican than the actual Republican Party. Are you shocked? Are you shocked? So let's take a look here. Nancy Pelosi, who looks like is going to be the next Speaker of the House, is instead of coming with a bold progressive agenda, go figure, is ramming through austerity. Despite pressure from progressive Democrats, the House rules package for the 116 Congress will include a pay-as-you-go provision requiring all new spending to be offset with either budget cuts or tax increases. A conservative policy aimed at tying the hands of the government. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who will be sworn in this week to represent a district in New York, will vote against the package. Her spokesperson told The Intercept. Congressman Ro Khanna announced Wednesday he will oppose it. Presumptive House Speaker Nancy Pelosi will be sworn in on Thursday, has promised for months to restore the pay-go rule, which she instituted when first taking over the Speaker's gavel in 2007. She ran into resistance from progressives who believed that the rule would make it more difficult for Democrats to pass a host of liberal agenda items. From Medicare for All to a Green New Deal to tuition-free public college. Critics also argue that PAYGO creates an unlevel playing field where Republicans get to blow giant holes in the tax code as they did with the 2017 tax cuts, while Democrats must pay fealty to the deficit. Quote, there's enormous appetite in the Democratic Party and among all Americans for major public investment to tackle our nation's major crises, deepening income inequality and structural racism and climate disaster, said Waleed Shahid, a communications director for Justice Democrats, in a statement to The Intercept. Pelosi and the Democratic Party leadership's support of PAYGO makes actually solving these crises all but impossible. The Democratic Party leadership is unilaterally disarming and shooting themselves in the foot. And he had a fantastic tweet. Dems and PAYGO, I guess, running them. He's illustrating their hitting themselves or hurting themselves or, running over themselves by foot. The PAYGO rule House Democrats will institute is actually an improvement on what House Republicans put into place in 2011. They created a rule called Cut-Go, which required any new spending to only be offset with budget cuts instead of tax increases. So I'm not going to read the rest of this. You get the point. The bottom line is this, and let me show you Bernie Sanders' response to this. Bernie Sanders' response: at a time when the climate change threatens our planet, when our infrastructure is crumbling, when 30 million people have no health insurance, I'm concerned that the concept of PAYGO will make it harder for Congress to address the many crises facing our working families. Unfortunately, I have to take on Bernie Sanders' response because this response is not strong enough. Not even close. Sorry to say, Senator Sanders. It's a diplomatic response, but to say I'm concerned that the concept of PAYGO will make it harder, no, this is the time to start fighting. Because obviously, Nancy Pelosi and the Democratic corporate establishment ain't listening, Bernie. Obviously, they don't care about your movement and the progressive movement. They're not paying attention to the likes of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and progressive insurgents primarying candidates. If they were, they would not be implementing Republican. This isn't even Republican austerity. This is worse than Republican austerity because the Republicans, they talk about debt and deficit and then blow it up. The Republicans actually do blow up the debt. This is actually the Democrats, what they do for, it's not about trying to be fiscally conservative. It's actually about trying to make sure we don't get progressive policies like Medicare for All, like free public college, like a Green New Deal. And I'll tell you why. Because PAYGO is essentially a way to pretend that the Democratic Party is being fiscally conservative while basically eliminating chances of Medicare for All, of free public college, of a Green New Deal, of government jobs programs, because it says basically if you're going to do things like that, you need to find equal to larger cuts or tax increases, which is terrible economics, which frankly for you MMTers out there, I've reached out to Stephanie Kelton like 6 times already via email. I've also called Stony Brook University, where she's a professor. I'm trying to get an interview with Miss Kelton on MMT, because the principles of MMT are fiercely against pay-go. You do not have to find cuts for every investment you make. You do not have to raise taxes for every investment you make, because first of all, the problem, which MMT would teach you, the problem is not necessarily rising deficits and debt. The problem is if printing money and the government spending money causes inflation. So MMT economics, which I am reaching out to more people than Stephanie Kelton, since unfortunately I haven't been able to book her yet. The bottom line is, it is a misnomer that the government can't afford these things. And if the government would do Medicare for all, if the government would invest in, I shouldn't say the government, if Nancy Pelosi and the Democratic Party would do Medicare for all, if Nancy Pelosi and the Democratic Party would do free public college, if Nancy Pelosi and the Democratic Party would do a Green New Deal, guess what? You would have more revenue coming into the United States government. You would also have less costs overall for the United States government, because everybody would be covered by healthcare, so overall healthcare costs would go down because less people would be chronically sick. More people would get preventative care, which would prevent long occurring illnesses like cancers that cost a lot of money. If you had something like free public college, you would get more students educated. There would be less of a student loan freaking iceberg or thundercloud over not just students, but older Americans still buried in student loan debt. So guess what? They could actually spend some of their paycheck on dinners and on buying things into the economy and spending money in the economy. Here's the bottom line. The Democratic Party and Nancy Pelosi, what they're doing is not actually trying to be fiscally responsible. What they're doing is actually trying to make sure their donors don't have a panic, and their donors don't get angry at them, and their donors don't actually basically start pulling the money. Nancy Pelosi wants to put in pay-go to put up this little smokescreen that the Democratic Party is the party of fiscal responsibility. No. Why she's doing it is because she knows, and Chuck Schumer knows, and Steny Hoyer knows, and Dick Durbin knows, and Joe Biden knows, and all the corporate Democratic establishment pretending to be progressives. I'm talking to you, Joe Biden. I'm talking to you, Beto O'Rourke. I'm talking to you, Kamala Harris. I'm talking to you, Cory Booker. I'm talking to you, Kirsten Gillibrand. I could go on and on and on. Really, what Nancy Pelosi is doing is trying to appear like they're, fiscally responsible, while in reality saying to their donors, this stops those little, progressive hippies talking about Medicare for all and free college and, a Green New Deal and all these things, because if we say pay-go, well, how are we going to afford those things? Why is it, though, that the Democratic Party, it doesn't seem to me that they use pay-go when it comes to endless war in Syria, endless war in Afghanistan, the United States arming Saudi Arabia, refueling Saudi Arabians' jets? How come we don't issue pay-go for the endless war? Might it be that the Democratic Party is also bought off by Raytheon? Is also bought off by Boeing? Is also bought off by Lockheed Martin? Is also bought off by Northrop Grumman? Could it be? There's never pay-go for the military-industrial complex. Only if you're trying to save people's lives, healthcare, educate people, free public college, or save the planet. That we need to pay for. The endless wars, hey, that's just the war economy, baby. That's just the war economy. responses like this, I'm sorry, but I will take on Bernie Sanders if I have to. Responses like this is not going to get it done. It's just not. At a time when climate change threatens our planet, when our infrastructure is crumbling, when 30 million people have no health insurance, I'm concerned that the concept of pay-go will make it harder for Congress to address the many crises facing our working families. That is a very nice tweet, Bernie. That's a very diplomatic tweet, but that is not going to get it done. Right now, you have an exploding progressive movement behind you. Between Ro Khanna, between Tulsi Gabbard, between Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, between Rashida Tlaib, between lower level progressives that were elected, lower name progressives that were elected. Ro Khanna, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Rashida Tlaib, obviously Bernie Sanders, Jeff Merkley. Now is the time when the Democratic Party, before they even officially become the majority party, they haven't even been sworn in yet, and they're putting out these very, 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 these are worse than the Republican Party, because the Republican Party just gives lip service to cut anytime you do a tax cut or go to war, or anytime you have an expensive program, you have to find cuts. The Republican Party just does lip service to that. They never actually do find cuts. They never actually do care about the deficit, because they're all about making sure more and more rich people could buy more and more yachts. They don't care about the debt. That's why Paul Ryan was the biggest fraud in Washington, D.C. for decades. He didn't care about debt. He never liked a tax cut. There was no tax cut he didn't love. There was no deficit, debt, exploding tax cut, or war, or entitlement, or, Medicare Advantage under Bush that Paul Ryan didn't love. They're all frauds. But the Democratic Party is actually following through with austerity when half of the country is near or at the poverty level, where majority of the country does not have $400 for an emergency, when 30 million people are uninsured. And by the way, the underinsurance problem is just as bad. You think Obamacare is able to be actually used by the majority of people on Obamacare? No, the deductibles are too high. The copays are too high. The coinsurance is too high. So the Democratic Party's response to a populist explosion in America, because I do think there's going to be a yellow vest movement in America pretty soon. I think it's going to be Occupy with some leadership this time. No offense to Occupy, but they did not have a leadership structure. But the Democratic Party's plan in the face of austerity is, we have to find cuts. We have to find programs to cut or taxes to raise if we're going to invest in saving the planet or invest in insuring everybody. This is all a smokescreen to say, whisper to the donors, hey, don't worry about those like Ocasio-Cortez's and Bernie's, We're just going to throw out this pay-go thing, but don't worry about it. Your money's good with us. That's what it is. That's really what it is. Here's what I think. Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ro Khanna, Tulsi Gabbard, Raul Grijalva, other progressives, they need to galvanize their base and the progressive base to storm Congress now. What are you waiting for? Nancy Pelosi is not going to change her ways unless you light a collective inferno up her behind. Sorry for that graphic. Bernie, I'm a big fan of Bernie Sanders, but these kind of tweets aren't going to get it done. It's just not. We can't be diplomatic with these people. They are sociopaths. They are Republicans masquerading in progressive cloth. Bernie's concerned that the concept of pay-go will make it harder. No, Bernie, you got to get in front of a friggin' microphone with those other progressives, and you got to call out your base to peacefully get on the steps of Capitol Hill against pay-go, against austerity, and demanding that Nancy Pelosi, that Chuck Schumer do not deflect the entire political discussion onto Donald Trump, because that's their plan. They don't want to talk about money in politics, folks. They do not want to talk about income inequality. They don't want to talk about poverty. They don't want to talk about endless war. They want to talk about Trump. They want to talk about Russia. They want to talk about porn stars. They want to talk about Playboy models. And I think if you want to defeat Donald Trump, the way to defeat Donald Trump is not focusing on 25 investigations about Donald Trump. It's only going to rally his base more. The way to defeat Donald Trump is to offer a stark, sharp contrast. So I think, and let me, before I switch topics, let me show you what Ro Khanna's response to the PAYGO was. This is not accurate, and no serious progressive economist agrees with you. We could pass policies in the House without an offset and then negotiate in conference for the appropriate tax increases on the 1%. We shouldn't be negotiating against ourselves. You tell them, Ro. By the way, I followed up with Ro Khanna's press secretary today because we were talking about doing an interview before at the end of last year, and they told me to reach back out in the new year. So we're trying to get Ro Khanna too. We're trying to get everyone. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on PAYGO. Tomorrow, I will also vote no on the rules package, which is trying to slip in PAYGO. PAYGO isn't only bad economics, as Ro Khanna explains, it's also a dark political maneuver designed to hamstring progress on health care and other legislation. We shouldn't hinder ourselves from the start. So I think there's two important things that Ro Khanna said and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. So getting back to Ro, we shouldn't be negotiating against ourselves. Well, can we just look back? I'm sorry to do this. Barack Obama, as president, was one essentially negotiating against himself. He basically started on, if you look at it like in a football game, he basically started on the Republican Party's 5-yard line. He gave the Republicans everything they wanted right out of the gate. I mean, instead, he had a Democratic House, a Democratic Senate, and he basically had one of the largest mandates a president has had probably in half a century. I mean, the Americans would have voted for an ice cream man over a Republican after what George W. Bush did to this country. And Barack Obama came out of the gate, not with Medicare for all, not with a public option, with a plan out of the Republican Heritage Foundation, Romney Care, as they called it, a Republican health care plan. Excuse me, ladies, a blowjob to the insurance companies. I mean, that was Obama. And now the Democrats are doing the same thing. They are coming. Chuck Schumer has never met a crappy deal to give the Republicans 60% of what they want. And why do they do this? Is it because the Democratic Party's stupid, or is it because the Democratic Party isn't making the decisions? The donors for the Democratic Party are making the decisions. The donors tell the Democrats what to offer and when to offer it. It's not Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer calling the shots. It's Wall Street. It's big oil. It's big pharma. It's Silicon Valley. It's real estate developers. They're not calling the shots. These industries are calling the shots. That's why the Democratic Party does things like PAYGO. That's like the Democratic Party is giving the Republicans exactly what they want.